Let's get knitting. Okay guys, so we're gonna start on our washcloth dish rag project. If you purchased the supply pack, this is what your yarn is gonna look like. Come in a nice ball there. And the first thing we're gonna do is find our ends. So you can see I have one end here. This is my middle end, and here is my outer end. So to keep everything tucked in a nice ball to keep it from unraveling, I'm gonna tuck that outer end. I just tucked it there into the ball itself so that we don't have a loose end hanging out there. Next, I'm gonna pull this inside yarn out. All right, now our ball is ready to start knitting. We're gonna pull from the center thread, and that's where we're gonna work from. So I'm gonna move this just off camera here so we can focus on the needles. All right, so to start our knitting, first we need to cast on. And to begin that cast on, I want you to stretch out, I want to say this is about 6 inches of yarn here. So 6 inches of yarn, or maybe like a hand length. You can give yourself a little bit extra if you want to be on the safe side. And the first thing we're going to do is form a slip knot. So to form the slip knot, we're going to go, I go around my hand. You'll see that crossover, that X there. And we're going to tuck the yarn under and up through that loop. And we can pull either end, and there we have our slip knot. Let me show you one more time. Okay, around your hand, we've got the X crossover. I'm going to go under, hold that loop, and we're going to tighten the knot. Okay, so there is a slip knot. We're going to put our needle right in the middle of that slip knot and tighten down our first stitch. Now it doesn't need to be tightened all the way. Something that you are going to master as you get a little bit better at this is tension. Tension plays a big role in knitting. So now we have 2 strings here. We have one string that's the end, that's our loose end there, and we have one string that's attached to our ball of yarn. You want to grab that string that's attached to your ball of yarn, and basically we want a flat palm. You're going to grab that and form a thumbs up, and you're going to pass. Make sure you don't get that end that's hanging loose. You're going to pass your thumb under and around. Let me show you one more time. We grab our yarn, just like that, thumbs up. Thumb goes under and around. Now see how we can form a crossover right there with our yarn. You're going to cross that over and slide that loop off of your thumb onto the needle. And there we have our second cast on stitch onto our needle. Okay, let's do that again. Once again, make sure you don't grab your loose end here. Grab the yarn that's attached to your ball. Thumbs up with the yarn in the middle. You're going to go under, up around, and then you're going to slide that loop onto your needle. There we have 3 stitches. One more time. Thumbs up, under, up around, slide onto your needle. Okay, I'm gonna give you guys a different angle in case this angle is not working for you and you need a different angle. All right, I recognize that the bird's eye view is probably not the best view for everybody, so I'm gonna give you guys a slightly different angle here. So, got my thumbs up, I'm gonna grab my yarn, I'm gonna go under, up, around, and slide that on there. There we go, and I give that just a gentle little tug there at the end. So thumbs up, grab my yarn, under, up, around, slide on. Thumbs up, under, up, around, oop. There we go. Okay, and as you get more stitches on here, you're going to just sort of gently slide them down, make room for the new ones, and we're going to cast on 20 stitches. So do this 20 times, and if you need to, you can pause, rewind, go back. But let's skip ahead here. We'll move on to our next step. All right, so hopefully we've made it to the point where we have 20 stitches cast onto our needle. Now keep in mind, if you had trouble making it to this point, don't worry, it's okay, we'll get you here. I want you to just re-watch that video, pause, take as much time as you need. If you're really struggling, feel free to send me an email. I'll respond to it in my office hours. And if you need to ask any questions or get any help, remember we have our Zoom meeting coming up. So, next step, well actually before I pick up my next needle, first I'm going to make sure that all of my stitches are lined up. See how down here I have a ridged edge, and over the top of here I have a loop that runs over the top of my needle. Oftentimes when we're casting on, we can get a twist in here. If we don't spot that twist, that's going to be a problem for us while we're knitting. So see how the ridge goes from the bottom and it twists over the top? That's not good. All we have to do is gently line up those stitches. And as you get more experience with knitting, you'll be able to spot those things a little bit easier, spot those anomalies. Okay, so check your work. Make sure everything's lined up, nice and straight. And now we're ready to pick up our other needle. So, I'm going to show you guys from this direction, and then we're going to do a close-up from the other direction. We have our long needle here, or our long yarn here. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide our needle through that loop in behind. So we just created an X. I'll show you again. Slide that needle in behind. Now, I'm going to grab this yarn and we're going to cross through the middle of that X. I'll show you one more time. We're going to go through that first loop, behind the first needle. We're going to grab our working yarn, pass through the center of that X. Now, we're going to start to slide this needle back, and as we pull it back, we're going to pull that loop through the first loop. So we just created a whole second loop. Next, we're going to inch this up towards the tip of the needle. You're gonna pull that first stitch off, and we just knit our first official stitch of our first official row. Now let's do that one more time. You're gonna stick your needle in that loop, cross it in between the two stitches. You're gonna bring that yarn through the middle, pull it through, and slide that stitch off. Okay, now let's show you from a different angle. All right, let's try that from a different angle. So let's make sure all of our stitches are nice and lined up. We're gonna slide our needle in the middle behind the first needle. I'm going to bring our working yarn around. This is called throwing our yarn around. In between the two needles, I'm going to bring her under, pull her through. One more time. Okay. I'm going to pass the needle through the middle of the loop behind the first needle. Wrap the yarn around, pull her through, pass it off to the next needle. Okay, let's try that again. We're going to pass our needle through the middle, wrap the yarn around in between the two stitches, or in between the two needles, pull it through. Pass the needle through the loop, bring the yarn around the middle, pull it through. Okay, now as you're knitting, if you realize that there's a big lead in between here, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's all that there? That's just your tension getting a little bit wonky, and one way you can fix that is just by relaxing a little bit. Sometimes when we're first learning to knit, we get really tense and we start pulling. You start pulling on the yarn, and then it can get hard to pass your needle through the middle there. If we just kind of relax our yarn a little bit, relax our grip, that's going to loosen up our needles, or our stitches. Okay, so let's pass the needle through, wrap the yarn around, pull it up through the middle. Pass the needle through, wrap the yarn around, pull it through the middle. Now, one thing that's helping me out a little bit here is my grip of the yarn. A lot of people when they first start out want to hold their yarn like this and wrap it around like that, but we don't actually get much finesse or tension by holding our yarn like this. What I'm actually doing is weaving the yarn through my fingers. So let me show you one more time. We're going to go over the pointer finger, under the middle finger, over the ring finger, and under the pinky. So that gives me a bit of tension here with my yarn and makes it easier to hold. So I'm using these hands to kind of hold and create tension, and then I'm using my pointer finger to guide the yarn around, to throw the yarn around that loop. So here we are. We've got the yarn woven through my fingers, close there, creating a bit of tension, and then I'm using that pointer finger to guide the yarn around my needles. So give that a try. Even if you just hold your hand like this and you can feel how you can guide the yarn around, That will help you out. If you're not quite there yet, that's okay. That's totally okay. If you need to drop the yarn each time and pass it around with the whole hand, that's totally okay. So you're gonna work in stages and steps. Just know that there's an option out there. If you're struggling with tension, there's an option out there to help you out with that. So let's go back to knitting. Okay. Did you see what just happened there? Okay, I accidentally moved the yarn over and I wasn't ready to actually stitch. So what I did is I moved it back to the first needle. And pass your needle through, wrap the yarn around, pull it through. As I'm adding stitches, I'm moving them down on my needle. Pass your needle through the middle, wrap the yarn around, pull it through. Alright, I'm going to take you guys back to the overhead view and we'll get some knitting done here. Alright, we are so close. We're about halfway through our first row here and we're just going to keep trucking along. So I'm going to show you guys how to finish this cast on. We're just going to do it together. So pass your needle through, wrap it around, pull it through. Pass your needle through, wrap it around, pass your needle through, wrap it around, pull it through. Okay, now I'm going to back up and show you guys some needle positioning. As you can see, it's a little bit hard with the table here. The ends of my needles keep kind of clicking on the table and I can't quite get a good hold of things. So I am going to show you guys how sitting position, how the ends of these needles work, and show you guys how I like to hold them. So we have finished our first row of knitting here, and I'm going to flip my work and start on the next row. So all I do, if you imagine I just finished knitting here, move my work up to the top. So I just finished stitching my last stitch here, and all I do is I switch hands. So now my working yarn is back in the start position, and when we start our next row, make sure you don't get your tail, your loose end. You want to get your yarn that's attached to your ball. And we're just going to go ahead and start on our second row here. So again, making sure all of our stitches are lined up with the ridges facing the bottom part of our work. This gets easier to recognize as you build length here. You won't even have to think about it. Just those first few rows. So I scooch everything up towards the top of the needle, and I'm going to show you guys how I hold my needles, because when we were working flat and looking overhead, it was kind of hard to get an idea of how I was holding my needles. So I prefer to, like I showed you, weave my yarn in between my fingers, and I like to hold pretty close to the top of the needle. And it's these three fingers, your thumb, your pointer, and your middle finger, that are sort of holding the needle. And then I use my ring finger and my pinky. My pinky does a lot of work here to help sort of steer the needle and navigate. So it's sort of like learning to use chopsticks for the first time. This can be a little awkward and clumsy, but think about pinching with your pointer, middle, and thumb, and steering with your pinky and your ring fingers. So as I put my needle in, place my needle in between, guide my yarn around, and remember I'm throwing my yarn and using that tension to wrap my hand around, pulling it through, and you can see how my pinky is aiding in the motion of pulling the tip of that needle through. So I'll show you again. I use my pinky to leverage that needle up and pull it through. Let's do it again. I place my work through, wrap it around, and I use my pinky and my ring finger to navigate that right needle through. Now if you're left-handed, I am going to try and do a mirrored version here and just flip the video for my left-handed friends. But right-handed, your right hand's going to be doing a lot of the work. Left-handed, your left hand's going to be doing a lot of the work. So I'll try and do that in the video editing and see if I can make a left-handed and a right-handed version. I also did want to point out that you'll notice that my needles sort of bounce back and forth as I knit. So I'll show you. As I knit, particularly that right needle is sort of wobbling up and down. So I like to make sure that there's not like an armrest or a pillow or someone sitting right next to me. It can get a little uncomfortable to navigate if you're poking somebody or something in the side over here on your right side, or your left side if you're left-handed. But yeah, so have a nice clear space, give yourself lots of room. All right, so congratulations guys, we are well on our way to knitting at this point. So we're gonna go ahead and continue to flip and knit our work back and forth as we go. And I want you to focus on just making sure that you can visually see each of these stitches. Try and get an even amount of tension. If you either need to pull a little more or relax a little bit, and try to get even stitches across. And we're not actually going to count our rows on this project. What I want you to do is continue knitting until you feel like you have a square piece of fabric. So this is what it'll look like hanging off of the needle. I want you to knit until you feel like this is roughly a square washcloth. And we're gonna leave it on the needle until we get to next week's class. And in next week's class, I'm gonna teach you guys how to cast off, how to actually get the fabric off of the needle without it unraveling. And then I'm gonna show you how to add this little loop on the end of your washcloth. And then I'm gonna teach you how to cast on and start knitting our scarf. We're gonna learn how to count rows and stitches later on down the road. But for now, happy knitting. I hope your washcloth project goes well. Feel free to email me if you have any questions in the meantime. If not, I look forward to seeing you in our Zoom call class so that we can discuss any troubleshooting or progress reports that we want to go over. All right, happy knitting guys. Have a good afternoon.